Hi, I'm Mirabel. My family changed the locks before the funeral. I wasn't even told what day it was. They said it was just an oversight. But then I found the footage, the forged will, the sealed letter from my father, hidden in the walls of our childhood home. They smiled at me over dinner while erasing me behind closed doors. And when I tried to fight back, they tried to label me unstable. Why would the people who raised me go to such lengths to keep me out? What truth were they so desperate to bury? It started with a call that wasn't really an invitation, just a cousin's offhand mention of the family reading happening this weekend in Bozeman. The way she said it, like I should already know, made my chest tighten. I thanked her and hung up, then sat in silence, staring at the faded curtains in my small rental in Billings. I hadn't gotten a formal invite, not from Mom, not from Celine, not from anyone whose name would have meant something. Maybe it was just an oversight. Maybe they assumed I'd be too busy, too far away. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake. I pressed my palm against the old army patch on my keychain, Dad's patch. The fabric had frayed over the years, but I carried it everywhere. It reminded me of who I used to be, a soldier, an engineer, a daughter. The next morning I packed a small bag, slid it into the trunk of my car, and began the drive toward Bozeman. The landscape unfolded like a memory I hadn't dared to revisit. Montana's long stretches of highway, the subtle rise and fall of hills, and the scent of distant pines carried ghosts. I passed the gas station where Dad used to buy me orange soda, the park where we'd feed the ducks, his deep voice still echoing in my ears, patient, steady. I should have felt excitement. Instead, dread sat heavy in my gut. When I pulled up to the family house, nothing looked different. Same white picket fence, same yellow porch swing. But when I reached for the gate, I found it locked. Not rusted shut or stuck, actually locked. I stared at it for a moment, then pulled out my old house key, trying it in the side gate. It didn't fit. Above the front door, a small black orb blinked red. A security camera. That was new. I stepped back and stared at the house. I felt like a stranger on a street I used to call home. I knocked. Once, then again. No answer. I texted Celine. Outside. Gates locked. Can you open? No reply. I walked down the side path toward the kitchen window. The curtains were parted just enough. Inside, I could see the living room buzzing with life. Celine stood near the fireplace, raising a glass. Vera, my middle sister, was laughing, her shoulders thrown back like she hadn't a care in the world. And there was Mom, her silver hair pinned up, seated at the head of the long dining table. I froze. How long had it been since we'd all been in the same room? I tapped gently on the glass. No one noticed, except a young cousin, maybe 12. She locked eyes with me, her smile fading. She reached forward and slowly drew the curtain shut. It felt like the air had been pulled from my lungs. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the muffled sound of clinking glasses and laughter. Then I turned back toward the car. Inside, the silence wrapped around me like a cold blanket. I opened the glove compartment, fingers fumbling for something familiar. I found it. A folded photo. Me and Dad, fishing in Flathead Lake. He was holding up a tiny fish, smiling like it was the biggest catch of the day. My face, barely 12, beaming beside him. Was I ever really part of this family? I whispered. My hand trembled as I placed the photo back. I reached for the ignition, ready to drive off. But then, something caught my eye. A white envelope tucked beneath the windshield wiper. The envelope flapped lightly against the glass, barely held in place by the windshield wiper. It was small, cream-colored, and worn at the corners, as though it had passed through more hands than just one. I stood there, fingers stiff in the cold morning air, staring at it as though it might vanish if I looked away. I glanced over my shoulder. No one. The family home loomed behind me, indifferent. I reached for the envelope with caution, like it might explode. The handwriting on the front was curved and familiar, just familiar enough to stir a memory I couldn't quite grab. It simply said, "You deserve to know the truth. Look where he used to hide your medals." My breath caught. The medals. Only one person had ever hidden those with such ritual and care. I didn't wait. Heart thudding, I circled around the side of the house, keeping close to the hedges. The porch creaked faintly as I crouched beside the latticework. I pulled up the loose board Dad always left slightly ajar, the one that groaned like an old floorboard. Dust and cobwebs. I reached in. There it was, the rusted ammo box he'd used since before I was born, always sealed with a strip of duct tape, even though there was nothing inside that required securing. I tugged it free. Leaves crunched behind me, but I didn't turn. No one was there. Opening the box was like unsealing a vault in my chest. Inside, my junior ROTC medal, the first note he ever wrote me from deployment, a pressed daisy from the time I broke my leg, and Mom told me flowers healed more than bones. And then, the envelope, labeled in his handwriting, Addendum, Everett Hale. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, box in my lap, engine off. The addendum was thick, folded over, sealed with red wax that had cracked over time. It wasn't ornate, just functional. Like Dad, I broke it open. Inside, the letter was dated 6 months before he passed, signed and witnessed by a notary whose name meant nothing to me. His handwriting danced slightly with age, but was unmistakably his. He wrote, "If you're reading this, Mirabel, then you found what I meant for you. You are to inherit the house and everything in it, not because of duty or favoritism, but because you know why this place matters. What I saw that night changed everything. I couldn't undo it, but I could leave you this." I read it 3 times, each time slower. He knew something. And this was legally binding. The house, the land, everything they were in there discussing, it was mine. And they knew. They had to know. I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of the letter, fingers trembling, called Gideon Hale, our old family lawyer. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. Did they hide this from him? Or had he helped them bury it? I sat in silence, watching my breath fog the windshield. The paper trembled in my hands, but I was steadying. My years in the Guard had taught me how to hold still even when the ground quaked. Not anymore. I wasn't going to be shut out again. I drove toward town, past the diners with their morning regulars and the corner drugstore where Dad once bought me root beer candy. The law office sat in a narrow building next to the post office. Closed for the weekend. I parked out front anyway. Pulled out my phone. Started recording. My name is Mirabel Hale. This is September 14th, 9:03 a.m. I'm sitting outside Gideon Hale's office. Earlier this morning, I found a sealed addendum to my father's will, hidden in the ammo box beneath the porch where he used to stash my childhood medals. My voice shook slightly. I kept going. The document is signed and notarized. It says I inherit the house and everything in it. I'm leaving a copy in the glove compartment and uploading a backup to my cloud account. If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident. I clicked stop. For a long time, I just sat there. Later, back in the car, I unfolded the letter once more. My eyes settled on the line I hadn't let myself linger on earlier. What I saw that night changed everything. "What did you see, Dad?" The thought made my chest tighten. Then, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Blocked. I hesitated. Then I answered. "Hello?" A pause. Then a voice. Calm, unfamiliar, but not entirely so. "You don't know me," it said. "But I knew your father, and I know what he saw." My fingers clenched around the steering wheel. "What do you want?" I asked. "I want to help, before they erase everything." The line went dead. I dragged the voicemail out of my phone at midnight, sitting on the edge of my bed in my apartment outside Bozeman. The room was dark, only the street lamp light filtering through the curtains over the window. I pressed play. My father's voice sounded fragile, older than I remembered in his last months, but it was unmistakably him. "If something happens to me," he said, voice quavering, "don't trust what they show you at the reading. You were always my North Star." There was that slight pause, a crack in his tone. "What they show you, it'll be polished, but it won't be what I meant." I stared at the ceiling. My throat tightened. He had meant this for me, and I hadn't known until now. The next morning, I pulled on my old jacket, the one I wore in training, and drove east over the plains to Aunt Connie's house. Her home was almost hidden in pines, off a gravel road that twisted up a ridge. It was the kind of place my father had described to me often in letters. Quiet, trustworthy. A place where secrets could be safe. Connie greeted me with her familiar smile and a flask of tea in hand. She looked older, thinner, her eyes stressed, but when she saw the face I carried, the guilt flickered in them. I held up my phone. "I have something," I said. "Something Dad left me." She nodded, ushered me inside. The kettle hissed. The smell of brewed tea and rain on green pines wrapped around us. Connie poured. The steam curved in the dim light. Connie swallowed hard before speaking. She told me 2 years ago Papa, Everett, confided in her, after I had left for training, something about being worried that the will I knew was written and rewritten under pressure. He said someone was tampering. He asked Connie to help him find a way to record evidence. He spoke of hiring a private notary, but Papa's surgery came too soon. He never finalized the addendum in front of witnesses who mattered. Connie said she couldn't speak up, not with Mom's pride, not with Celine's reputation, not with fear it would tear the family apart. I nursed my teacup, letting her words settle. Betrayal that had been invisible until now. A legacy fractured by silent compromise. Connie passed me a photo. Yellowed edges, faded corners. Everett in his workshop, sleeves rolled up, holding a draft will he'd sent Connie by mail. In his handwriting, "For Mirabel, my daughter who kept every promise I made." It named me as heir not just to the house, but to every piece of land, every piece of furniture, every memory stored in wood and nails and paint. The weight of that photo in my hand felt heavier than the empty chair I'd been sleeping in, wondering where I belonged. She also said Jonathan Stiles was the notary's name. A man Dad respected, retired, steady, not inclined to gossip. Connie had meant to share this earlier, but fear, regret, family loyalty held her tongue. The drive back felt different. The air seemed colder, but sharper in some moral clarity. I replayed my memories, late-night talks, times I waited by the phone for her or Celine to call when Dad was sick. I remembered Celine locking the study door just after the funeral, like hiding something I should have known, like erasing me. "They planned this," I whispered into the empty cab of my car. I clenched the photo in my lap. My uniform sat in the back seat. I thought of order, codes, integrity, stuff I believed in. And now I felt like that entire system had been manipulated behind scenes where I wasn't allowed. Back in Bozeman, I sat at my small desk, flicked on my laptop, hands shaking. I typed out a note to Gideon. Photo attached. Draft will in Everett's handwriting. Notary named Jonathan Stiles. I want this made public. I paused, hesitated, then added, "If anything happens to me, the truth must be written in more than whispers." Just after I sent it, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Blocked caller. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. A voice came through after I accepted. Low, familiar but distant. "I heard your aunt." She told me what she kept. I shut the laptop, let the lines blur in dark. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my father's voice from the voicemail replayed itself like a haunting lullaby. When the sky turned a pale gray and the sun dared to break the horizon, I was already at the dining table, laptop open, fingers trembling slightly over the keys. It took me a moment to recall the old login credentials. Dad had once, years ago, written them on a yellow post-it and slid it inside the back cover of our family's hardbound atlas. I remembered because I was 12 and I'd laughed at him, who hides passwords in maps. But now, as I typed them in and the cloud storage opened, I silently thanked him for that odd logic. The footage was there, untouched, archived in a folder labeled Garage Security Camera 2. I clicked on a file time-stamped 2 days before the will reading. The screen flickered to life, black and white grainy video, late at night. My father's garage, dimly lit by a single overhead bulb. And then, movement. My breath caught. Celine, She entered slowly, alone, wearing her long camel coat, hair pulled back like she had somewhere official to be. She paused, looked directly at the camera, her expression unreadable, then moved swiftly. She bent beside the old shelving unit, shifted boxes with practiced familiarity. That's when I saw it, a black envelope clutched in her hand. She looked at it, then walked out of frame. I paused the video, heart racing. She knew where to find it. She wasn't searching. She was retrieving. I rewound a few seconds. There it was again, her fingers grazing the shelf before gripping the envelope like she already knew it would be there. Not an accident. Not chance. I zoomed in and printed a frame of her holding the envelope. Texted Aunt Connie the image with a single line. You were right. She took something. I saw it. A slow burn ignited in my chest. No more guessing. No more tiptoeing. Later that morning, I drove to the public library, neutral ground, away from wandering eyes. I printed a copy of the updated will Celine had emailed days earlier before locking me out of the family meeting. As I laid it out on the wooden desk under the dim library lamp, I started underlining. The legal inconsistencies practically screamed. No official notary seal, 2 unknown witnesses, no printed names, and most damning, no mention of revocation with cause, a standard phrase in codicils used to invalidate previous wills. My dad was meticulous. He wouldn't overlook something like this. It wasn't a will. It was a fabrication. Back in the footage, I searched for alternate camera angles. Dad had installed multiple after the 2017 break-in. Another one pointed toward the workbench. I opened a second file, same timestamp. There was Celine again, but this time, fumbling with papers beside the shredder. She lifted a document, paused, then sharply folded it and slid it into her coat pocket. It was all right there, evidence of omission, evidence of intent, and yet the worst part wasn't the footage, it was the silence. The realization that my sister, the one who used to braid my hair before school and share stolen sips of Mom's coffee, was capable of this. That night, just as I started encrypting copies of the footage to multiple cloud accounts, a message pinged through. No sender. Just a text bubble. Drop this for your own sake. I stared at the screen. My pulse didn't quicken. My breath didn't hitch. I had been in war zones, survived base bombings and betrayal under camouflage. This was personal. But I'd never been more prepared. I copied everything to a secure drive and sent a backup to Nathaniel Carr, a legal contact I'd served with in the Guard. I wrote only, "You'll know what to do if anything happens." As I organized files, renaming video stills and highlighting passages in the printout, I noticed something buried in the clutter of Dad's old email drafts. Subject: Notarized draft. Keep safe. Unopened. Time-stamped 3 days before his death. My hand hovered over the mouse. Click. The PDF loaded slowly, line by line. And there it was, his signature, bold and steady. Next to it, the notary's seal. Jonathan Stiles. The codicil was real, legally binding, and indisputably mine. The text came late Friday evening, just as I was lining up old files on the kitchen table trying to make sense of timelines. Dinner, Sunday, family only. No name, no explanation, just that. But I knew who it was from. My father had always preferred brevity over emotion, clarity over warmth, even in texts. What struck me wasn't just the tone, it was the sudden shift in silence. After days of being ignored, after being shut out, literally and figuratively, now an invitation. No, this wasn't an invitation. It was a test. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. My pulse didn't quicken, it steadied. This wasn't going to be a dinner. It was going to be a performance, one they had likely rehearsed, one where I would be cast as the unstable one, the bitter daughter with wild theories and no place at the table. So I replied, "See you at 6. The drive to Bozeman on Sunday was quiet. No music, just the hum of old tires and the steady rhythm of my heartbeat. On the passenger seat beside me sat a folder, cream-colored, nothing fancy, holding the printed footage stills, copies of my father's addendum, and Connie's scanned image of the notarized draft. I didn't bring a lawyer. I didn't need one. Not yet. The house looked the same from the outside, down to the ivy curling up the porch post. But I didn't look at the porch this time. I looked at the people inside. When I stepped in, the air smelled of rosemary chicken and fresh rolls. It should have felt warm, comforting. Instead, it stung like citrus in a wound. They were already seated, my mother at the far end, Celine to her left, Vera across. 2 cousins, their spouses, even a neighbor I barely recognized. Laughter died when they saw me. Dad didn't stand. "Glad you could make it," he said flatly. I nodded. Of course, wouldn't want to miss a family gathering. Polite chuckles rippled. They resumed small talk. I let them settle, watched the charade fold neatly around the table. Then, just as the first platter was passed, I placed the folder in front of me. No warning, no speech. I slid a printed still across the table. Celine's hand froze mid-reach for the butter. "What's this?" Dad asked, voice neutral. "The garage footage," I said. "From 2 nights before the reading." Celine's face paled. Her fingers curled back slowly, like touching something hot. Dad didn't touch the paper. "You're making this a spectacle," he muttered. I met his eyes. "You made this a war." No one moved. Then Aunt Connie stood, slowly, deliberately, and pulled her phone from her bag. "I think it's time," she said. Her voice trembled, but not from fear. She tapped the screen. A voice filled the room, Celine's. "Dad said to just make it clean. Nobody checks codicils anyway." A gasp. A fork clattered. Celine stood abruptly. "You recorded me?" Connie didn't blink. I did. Silence grew thick, heavy. No one touched their plates. I cleared my throat. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to state this plainly. I have evidence. I have motive. I have witness testimony. Any further defamation or obstruction will be handled in court." I didn't wait for a response. I picked up the folder, nodded at Connie, and walked out. Didn't touch my food. Didn't look back. In the car, I sat for a moment, engine off. The sky was softening into twilight. I let myself exhale. "You can't win respect in a house built on silence," I whispered. "You have to tear out the rot." Later that night, as I poured tea into an old mug, my phone buzzed. A message from my cousin Brian. "You okay? That was intense." I typed back, "No, but I'm finally done playing nice." Just before midnight, a sharp crack echoed outside. I rushed to the door. My mailbox, plastic, worn, red-flagged, was split down the middle. A rock rested nearby. No note, no fingerprints, just silence. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the darkness where the street met the trees. Someone wasn't backing down. I smiled. Neither am I. When I logged into my encrypted cloud storage that morning, a chill ran through me. The file, the notarized will my father had signed, the one with his unmistakable signature, was gone. Not just deleted, corrupted, irretrievable. I tried not to panic. Surely the flash drive I'd handed to Mark, the former military attorney I trusted, was still safe. But when I called him, his voice came low and tight. "Someone broke into my truck last night," he said. "Didn't touch anything but the glove box. Flash drive's gone." I stood in the middle of my small kitchen, the tile cold beneath my bare feet, clutching my phone like it could anchor me to something solid. "You didn't make a backup?" "I thought you did." I hung up without another word and stared at the ceiling like it could offer answers. Then I texted Aunt Connie, hoping at least her phone still held the audio file, the one where my sister practically confessed to fraud. "Phone reset itself overnight," she replied. "Everything's gone. I didn't touch it, Mirabel. I swear." I believed her, but belief wasn't going to win a courtroom. The world felt like it was collapsing, one trusted brick at a time. I drove to the county clerk's office, desperate for any official copy of the will draft. The place was quiet, stale with the scent of old paper and fluorescent fatigue. I approached the records desk where a young man with curly hair and tired eyes greeted me. I'm looking for any submission under Everett Hale, estate planning documents, last 6 months before his death. He typed slowly, glancing around as if someone might be watching. After a long pause, he leaned closer and whispered, "He came in last week. Claimed to be Everett, used an ID, but something felt off." I blinked. My father's been dead for over a year. He slid a sticky note across the counter, eyes not meeting mine. "It was your brother. I'm not supposed to say anything." The name on the note was my brother's, his handwriting unmistakable. I tucked it into my jacket, my hand trembling, and nodded my thanks before walking out into the biting Montana wind. That afternoon, the knock at my apartment door came soft but sure. A woman in a tan blazer handed me a thick envelope. "You've been served," she said, almost apologetically. "Defamation." My siblings were suing me, not to protect their reputation. No, this was an offensive maneuver. They wanted to keep me too tangled in court to investigate anything else. My court date was 2 weeks away. I called Mark again. "We need to file a counterclaim, emergency injunction, something," he interrupted, voice heavy. "Without the original will or a verifiable chain of custody, it's your word against a certified copy, and they have the notary stamp." My fists clenched. "Then I'll find something better." I started digging, rereading every email, every message, every camera angle from the footage I'd already reviewed. That's when it came. An anonymous email. Subject, "You're not crazy." Body, "They think they erased everything. They missed one." An attachment loaded, a grainy video, time-stamped 2 days after my father's death. It showed my brother entering the study, looking around nervously, then removing a black envelope from a locked drawer. I paused the video, heart pounding. I recognized the envelope. It was the same one from the garage footage, sealed, heavy, too important to be dismissed. It was after Dad died, which meant whatever he took, he had no right to. I forwarded the video to Mark with a message. "This is our new anchor. Let's use it." That night, as the wind howled through the cracks of my apartment windows, I sat surrounded by printouts, sticky notes, timestamps, and legal codes. I had 2 weeks to piece together a case from the ashes. 2 weeks to fight back, 2 weeks to win, and suddenly I knew I would. I woke up to 4 missed calls from Colonel Jacobs. My rank, Major, feels hollow when someone's trying to erase you. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone heavy in my hand, hoping none of them was about something irreparable, but the 5th call came from his office. I answered. "I'm sorry to bother you, Mirabel. I've had some paperwork submitted under your name. Psychiatric evaluation. It's flagging you as unstable. Pending review." Unstable. The words scraped against me like broken glass. I hung up, mind spinning. Someone had forged a psychiatric report. Someone had written conclusions I'd never given, feelings I'd never expressed, medical history twisted, and filed it under my name. I collected myself. I would not let this become another ghost in my past. I opened my laptop, traced IP logs, security alerts. One alert. Unusual sign-in attempt blocked. The IP mapped near Celine's apartment. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was sabotage. I sat in my home office with tea cooling beside me, footage frames spread across the desk. Every copy, every screenshot, every timestamp. I forwarded the log to Mark, included the IP address, location, everything. Legal avenues opened in my mind: defamation, cyber intrusion, false medical claims. The social media posts came next. Old photos twisted to look like breakdowns. Captions claiming I'm dangerous, unhinged, a liability. A post from a former friend claiming Mirabel's always been unstable. She threatened self-harm for attention. The lies cut deep. But in each cut, I found clarity. I will not be gaslit into silence. Connie came through that afternoon. She walked in, shaken but resolute. "I heard what they posted," she said quietly. "I've got something you should use." She handed me a timeline she'd compiled. Dates of attacks, posts, even archived emails. Connie was always quiet, but now she was loud in her documentation. "These things matter in court," she said. People believe what they read. I nodded, heart pounding. Evidence, yes, but I needed more. Then came something I didn't expect, an email from someone in DoD cybersecurity I'd worked with. Private, discreet. I followed the IP trail. It leads to a trust fund account in your brother's name, recently accessed, several small wire transfers. Follow the money. It matches posts and domain registrations. My blood froze. They were using Dad's inheritance not just to hide the truth, but to destroy me piece by piece. Anger surged, bright and fierce. That evening, I walked into Mark's office, stacks of printouts under my arm, clips of video stills, social media screenshots, email logs, psychiatric report copy, proof of IP logs, trust fund trails. I want everything on the record, I told him evenly, but with steel in my voice. If they want a war, I'll bring the law. He looked at me, eyes sharp. You have more than you know. I nodded. For the first time in a long time, I felt traction. Sunday morning sunlight spilled through the lawyer's office windows as I parked in front of the building. My hands on the steering wheel were steady. I had rehearsed this moment in my head thousands of times. It was time. When I walked inside, Celine's smirk was already in place. Vera sat on a leather chair, the distance between her knees tight. Celine offered a nod, cold and sharp. My lawyer, Gideon Hale, stood by the oak table, the same one Dad used to inspect with great care when he named things mine. I inhaled, feeling its weight heavy in my chest. Let's keep this professional, Gideon said, voice smooth but firm. He gestured toward the circle of chairs. I nodded, set the folder down in front of me. I didn't speak. I simply plugged in my phone into the USB port on the conference table and touched the screen. Before we begin, I said steadily, I believe it's time we all heard something. My voice echoed softly. The 3-minute audio played, laughter, schemes, Celine's voice. Nobody checks codicils anyway. Gasps, faces shifting. A fork clattered. My mother glanced down, eyes wide, like she wanted to disappear. Celine's face was pale, mouth set tight. Then the lawyer stepped forward. He said, There is another message your father left. A video file. If this is being played, then something has gone wrong. Everett's voice trembled slightly. I regret many things, but I have tried to set right what I could. If you're listening, know the house must go to Mirabel. What silence allowed, evidence will correct. My heart hammered. Tears stung at my eyes as the room shrank around me. My mother protested, her voice laced with hurt. You're putting words in his mouth. Celine shook her head, but her voice quivered. I steadied myself. This is bigger than money, I said, louder than I expected. You broke what was sacred here. My fingers curled into fists in my lap. I looked at Celine, at Vera, at the lawyer. I've been pushed out, ignored, written off, but this stops now. A silence fell. Connie, who has always been quiet, lifted her chin. I'm with you. We all deserve truth, she said, her voice firm. The lawyer cleared his throat. Under the terms of your father's final statement, the revised will include a clause. Any tampering or contestation will trigger a public investigation into all parties. If anyone disputes this, all documents, communications, including this meeting, become public record. My heart's pace slowed as a roar of vindication rose in my chest. The house, the place I used to run through as a child, the place I fixed after storms, the place that always smelled of cedar and home, is legally and irrevocably mine. Celine stood abruptly. This isn't over, she hissed. Tears glinted in her eyes, but I sensed fear. I looked at Mom. For a moment, I saw remorse, but also pride, anger, confusion. She didn't speak. Outside, I stood by the courthouse steps, breathing in cold air. The weight I'd carried for years had lifted, or maybe shifted into something fiercer. Maybe it never was a family, just people trapped in the same blood, I murmured, barely audible to passing cars. I stood before the courthouse doors in the cool morning air. The sun was pale, just beginning to stretch its light over the granite steps. Reporters gathered. Cell phones raised, lenses clicking. This wasn't routine. It was history in the making. Gideon Hale squeezed my shoulder before we walked in. I drew in a breath, thinking of my father's voice, steady even when he was scared. Inside, the courtroom was wide, the light echoing off wood panels, marble, thick fabrics. Celine and Vera sat across from me, their expressions sharp, wary. The judge's bench towered, clerk's desk strewn with documents. Gideon nodded once to me. It was time. Gideon stood to give opening statements. "Your Honor," he said crisply, "today we lay out the truth. We present evidence of tampered codicils, private recordings, and what should have been included but was omitted." He called Aunt Connie first, then played the full transcript of the audio from the family meeting. Celine's own words admitting they'd assumed no one would check. Celine's face turned ashen. The lawyer for Celine tried to interrupt, objecting that parts of the audio were inadmissible. The judge's gavel could have cracked glass as he ordered the transcript played in full. Every breath, every slight pause, every tone exposed. Vera's jaw clenched. The public gallery drew in. It felt like they were not just hearing, they were watching. Next, the judge asked for forensic examination of relevant documents. Mortgage deeds, signature comparisons, email metadata, old versions of the will draft. Davina Krish, the youth nurse who had cared for Dad in his final days, was called. She testified Dad was lucid during the evenings, sometimes dim during mornings, but in those final evenings, he knowingly mentioned wanting Mirabel to inherit based on what she alone knew. Connie followed. She told how Celine had late-night access to Dad's study, how drafts were altered after he spoke of change. The courtroom leaned in every time Connie's voice wavered. These were no mistakes. Lunch break came. Vera's lawyer approached me in the corridor. "Miss Hale," she said, "no one wants family torn apart in court. We can settle this quietly. Give you enough to move on. No public scandal." Her voice was smooth, calculating. I looked at her, then at the courthouse pillars. I remembered nights I couldn't sleep, tears I swallowed, silence I demanded of myself. I shook my head. "Thank you. But no, I'm not here for hush money. I'm here for the truth." Afternoon. Celine was on the stand. She looked composed, exterior strong, but inside, everything cracked. Gideon asked, "Why did you request the revised will just 2 days before Dad's major surgery?" Celine faltered. Her hands shook. The judge's clerk coughed. The courtroom exhaled. I watched her, trying to understand, not hatred, but clarity. Because here was the hypocrisy, here was the performance in evening gowns at the party, and quiet theft at night. The judge paused before closing arguments. Silence fell like weight. He turned to Vera. "You realize that if coercion is proven, the codicil is void. The original will stand." Vera's face flushed, anger, fear, pride clashing. My heart slammed in my chest. Was this it? The moment I'd carried with me through decades of doubt? The courthouse air was stiff with tension. You could feel it in the silence, the kind that settles over a room right before thunder cracks the sky. I sat upright, my hands folded tightly in my lap, watching the double doors like they might burst open with something unexpected. The judge returned, a thick file clutched in one hand, glasses perched low on his nose. His eyes were unreadable as he took his seat and cleared his throat. "This court has reviewed all submitted materials, digital evidence, testimony, handwriting analysis, and personal recordings. Based on the findings..." He paused. I stopped breathing. "The codicil, dated August 17th, is found to have been signed under undue influence and lacks the legal formality required for execution." There was a gasp, probably from Celine, but I kept my gaze forward. "The original will of Everett Hale, dated July 12th, stands." Vera's head fell slightly forward and she slumped in her chair. Celine didn't move. I didn't celebrate, not out loud. But inside, something that had been frozen for so long finally started to thaw. We exited in silence. Outside the courtroom, the wind had picked up. It tugged gently at my coat, like it knew it had been holding its breath too. Vera stormed past me, eyes hollow. She didn't speak. Celine lingered by the door. For a moment, I thought she'd walk away too, but then she turned. "I suppose you feel vindicated," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. I let out a slow breath. "No, I feel exhausted." She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. Her expression cracked just a little. "You never needed them to validate who you are," she whispered. Then she left, and for the first time, I believed it. Later that day, Gideon Hale met me outside the courthouse with a manila envelope in hand. "This came in during the discovery phase," he said. "Your father labeled it for you, said to deliver only if the original will was upheld." He handed it to me gently, like it might crumble. The handwriting on the front was unmistakably Dad's. "Mirabel, if this reaches you, it means you fought for the truth." I opened it in the front seat of my car, the same place I'd once clutched his army patch and cried. Inside, a single-page letter inked in the firm, sharp script I'd memorized from every birthday card he'd ever given me. "I knew the path wouldn't be fair to you. That's the curse of being clear-eyed in a family that prefers fog. But you've always seen what mattered. If you're reading this, you held the line. And I'm proud. Dad." I didn't even realize I was crying until a tear smudged the corner of the page. It had never been about the money. It was about not being erased. Driving home, I passed the old family house one more time. The swing out front was still there, creaking in the wind. For the first time, I didn't feel the pull to stop. A neighbor I barely remembered waved from her porch. I smiled back. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't painful. Dad's redwood cane sat in the passenger seat beside me. I reached for it, ran my fingers along the grain. It wasn't heavy, it was grounding. Back at the apartment, I lit the candle under the framed photo of me and Dad, fishing poles in hand, him squinting into the sun, me grinning crookedly. I remembered that day. We didn't catch a thing. I sent Connie a voice memo. "It's done. We did it." Then I sat in silence. Not a haunted silence. Just peace. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I picked it up, expecting spam. Instead, just one message. "There's more to your father's story than you know." I stared at it for a while. Then I looked back at the candle, the photo, the cane. Of course there was more. There always is. The message replayed again in my ear, distorted slightly by static. "Check under the study's floorboards. Something's waiting." I sat motionless in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, heart doing that uneven flutter it always did when I was on the edge of something irrevocable. The voice was male, deep, calm, but familiar in a way that tugged at memory without revealing its name. Whoever he was, he didn't sound like someone threatening me. It was a voice weighted with something else. Regret or warning. Midnight found me in my car, parked 2 blocks from the house I'd spent my childhood pretending not to care about. I kept the headlights off as I walked up the driveway, my boots crunching against gravel. The garden owl statue still stood by the porch steps, tilted from years of frost and thaw. I lifted it. The spare key was still underneath, wrapped in faded duct tape. Inside, the house smelled faintly of mothballs and lemon polish. I didn't bother turning on the lights. The study door creaked as I opened it. Dust floated in the moonlight slicing through the blinds. I hadn't been in this room since before Dad's funeral. His desk still stood where it always had, mahogany, scarred at the edges, like his knuckles used to be. I knelt beside it and began feeling the floorboards one by one. The third one in from the radiator gave slightly when pressed. I slid a flathead screwdriver from my coat pocket and pried it loose. Beneath it, wrapped in plastic and secured with aging tape, was a box no larger than a shoe. It had one word scrawled in Dad's unmistakable block letters across the top. Private. I held it in my lap for a moment, half expecting it to burst into flames or vanish like some cursed treasure in a movie. But it just sat there, silent, solid, real. I opened it slowly. Inside were 2 bundles. One was a stack of letters bound by a rubber band. The other was an envelope, stamped but never sent. Beneath them, a single photograph. I pulled the photo out first. It was of Dad, much younger, maybe late 20s. He was standing beside a woman I didn't recognize. Between them stood a boy, no older than 5. They all looked like they were caught mid-laugh, frozen in joy. The back of the photo was dated 1987, and under the date, Dad had written one name, Daniel Wren. The envelope was a will, unfiled but notarized. And this one didn't just leave me the house, it split the estate between me and Daniel Wren. I stared at the name, Daniel, a brother I never knew I had. My mouth went dry, my pulse thundered in my ears. The next morning, I confronted Mom. She sat at her kitchen table, sipping coffee like she had every morning of my life, as if my entire world hadn't tilted sideways overnight. "Do you know who Daniel Wren is?" I asked. Her hand froze midair. Her gaze met mine, and I saw the instant she realized I knew. She didn't deny it. "That was before us," she said quietly. "I thought he ended it." "He didn't," I said, setting the photo on the table. "He tried to stay connected. You gave him an ultimatum." She didn't respond. Her silence confirmed more than words could. Her face collapsed in on itself, shame turning her features inward. I didn't need to scream. The betrayal sat between us like a third cup of coffee growing cold. I left without finishing mine. It didn't take much digging to find Daniel. A paramedic in Oregon, public record search, LinkedIn profile, a few news mentions of heroism in the line of duty. I stared at his contact info for a full hour before I finally dialed. "Hello?" A calm, professional voice answered. "Hi." I hesitated. "You don't know me, but we might share a father." There was a pause, a long one. Then, "I wondered when you'd call." My stomach twisted. "You knew?" I suspected. I didn't know he'd left anything behind. For either of us. "We need to talk," I said. "Yeah, we do." We agreed to meet next week. As I ended the call, another message popped up on my phone, blocked number, just a few words. "Be careful who you trust with this." I stared at the screen, the air suddenly heavy again. I stood just inside the courtroom doors, old sunlight streaming through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. My heart felt like a drum in my ears. Across from me, Vera sat stiffly, her posture rigid, and Celine's gaze avoided mine. Gideon Hale, methodical as always, was preparing his papers, evidence spread neatly across the table. I took a breath. I was ready. The judge cleared his throat, eyes scanning the room. "All parties are present. We may proceed." Gideon rose. "Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming. The garage footage, the addendum, private letters, recordings, all point to undue influence and procedural violations. The codicil submitted August, lacking proper witnessing, notarization, and with signs of coercion, is void." I held my breath as the judge nodded. Then he said clearly, "The codicil is declared void. The original will of Everett Hale is restored in full." A whisper went through the courtroom. Mouths parted. Vera slumped, the tension in her shoulders dropping. Celine's face broke, tears pooling in her eyes. I didn't smile, I didn't celebrate, but I felt something shift, a weight lifting. No applause, just silence, heavy and full. My chest felt tight, but in a good way, as if that long ache of being ignored, minimized, erased was finally being acknowledged. I glanced at Celine. For a moment, I saw a bristle of regret there. She avoided my eyes. Vera looked away entirely, face turned toward the window. I felt for a second the chaos of years inside me, the longing, the anger, but also clarity. I exhaled. "Justice," I whispered to myself, though the word felt both heavy and soft on my lips. After the formalities, outside, steps cold beneath my boots, Celine approached. I'm sorry," she said, voice small in the wind. I paused. I let the words hang. Her apology was fragile, not enough to erase what was stolen, but enough to acknowledge something broke. "Sorry doesn't change what you stole," I said evenly. I stepped around her. She lowered her eyes. Vera watched from the courthouse portico, silent. Then Gideon handed me a folded letter, sealed with my father's familiar script. I had thought I already had every scrap of truth, but this was something different. He found it during discovery, hidden in a secret folder in his personal papers, never shared. I opened it, hands trembling. It read, "Mirabel, if this reaches you, it means you've fought for the truth. I'm proud. I may not have been perfect. I may have left unsaid things I wished I could explain, but you always saw what mattered. Keep standing. Everett Hale." Tears slipped unbidden down my cheeks. It was never about the house. It was never about possessions. It was about being seen, being believed. That evening I drove back toward the family home. The road was quiet, sky deepening into dusk. The house came into view, windows glowing, porch swing still there, creaking lightly in the wind. I didn't stop at the gate. I didn't need permission anymore. I unlocked the door with the old key. They never changed it, and stepped inside. The air smelled of aged wood and pine. I walked through rooms I'd once fled from, touching surfaces, Dad's rifle cleaning bench, his old desk, Mom's sewing box. I found the redwood jacket he had from his beginner National Guard days, with patches faded but not forgotten. I draped it on the chair in the living room where Dad used to sit. On the mantel, I placed the photo of him and me fishing. It was crooked, imperfect, but in its imperfection, it was home. Back in my apartment later, I lit a candle beneath that framed photo. The wick cracked softly. I sent a voice memo to Connie. "It's done. We did it." I sat in the dim light, letting the silence come. This time, it wasn't heavy. It was quiet. It was peace. Later, my phone buzzed. Unknown number again. I opened it. "There's more to your father's story than you know." I stared at the message, then at the flame of the candle flickering. I smiled slightly because for once I believed I could keep uncovering truth without fear. There's something about fighting for the truth that changes you. You start off thinking it's about justice, about winning back what's rightfully yours. But somewhere along the way, it becomes about remembering who you are, about refusing to let lies rewrite your worth. I didn't choose to be in a family that betrayed me, but I chose to stay standing when they tried to erase me. And that made all the difference. If you're watching this, maybe you felt like the outsider too. Maybe you've been locked out of spaces you helped build, made to question your sanity just for speaking up. I want you to hear me clearly. You are not alone, and you are not crazy. Integrity is quiet, but it is unshakable. Don't let anyone convince you your voice doesn't matter. Sometimes, the strongest kind of love you can show is choosing to tell the truth, even when it hurts. What would you have done in my shoes? Do you believe blood is thicker than justice? Have you ever had to stand alone to protect what's right? Tell me in the comments. Hit a 1 if this story hit home, or let me know what city you're watching from. If you didn't like this video, I'd still love to know why. Drop your thoughts below. And if you're here for stories that speak to truth, family, and what it means to reclaim your power, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Because in this space, we don't just tell stories, we uncover them together.